And we're live. Welcome, people, to the Sports Therapy Association podcast, episode 216. My name is Matt Phillips, creator of RunChatLive.com. And as always, this episode is being recorded live on the Sports Therapy Association YouTube channel and Facebook page. In this episode entitled The Patient No One Told You How to Treat, my special guest is going to be Alistair Beverley, director of ldphysio.com, promoting and improving healthcare services for those with learning and lifelong physical disabilities. Alistair is going to be presenting in the STA Theatre at Therapy Expo this year at 2:25 p.m. on day one, which is November the 27th, discussing the skills we as soft therapists can take from learning how best to support patients with a learning disability, something most of us are certainly not taught in our training, despite there being around 1.5 million people in the UK with a learning disability. If you have joined us for the live recording, then as always, feel free to place questions and shared experiences in the comments. We've had a few technical issues the last couple of weeks, so if the sound goes or anything, just put something in the comments so that I know. But hopefully it will be smooth sailing now with my new, sponsored by Vodafone, 500 megabytes broadband connection. If you are listening to podcasts and if you have any questions, you're welcome to find the recording on Sports Therapy Association YouTube channel and enter your question in the comments there. We do keep an eye on it. We try and keep the conversations going. But for now, without further ado, I shall clear the fog out of my throat and I shall bring up Alistair Beverley, director of ldphysio.com. Hey, Alistair, how are you doing?
Good evening, Matt. Very well, thanks. Yourself?
I'm okay. Well, you're still here. It's better than the last few weeks. The cameras haven't gone yet. So far, it's just heaven. We've got people joining us live. For example, 𝐶𝐶 is through the door. If you do decide to join us live, podcast listeners, then what I can do is bring your messages up on the screen so you can share your beautiful face or your logo. So there's a little bit of networking as well. 𝐶𝐶 says, evening all. Good to have you back, Matt. Thank you, 𝐶𝐶. I love you very much too. And Sir Glenn Murphy, which, as you all know, I love just saying, that's the caliber of listener we have here. Sir Glenn Murphy, MBE, is here as well. Evening, Sir Glenn. Thanks very much for joining us again. And as always, people, if you are new and you're watching from afar, you are welcome to ask questions. Martina, I love calling him Martina because that's what it looks like when it first comes up. But actually, it's not Martina at all. It's Alistair Beverley. I believe there's a story that Alistair's going to talk later, which involves no clothes and a banister, but we'll talk about that later. Martin is here. I'm so excited to heckle Alistair that I even showered before this. So fantastic. The mood has been set. Alistair, anything you want to say to Martin? How he knows?
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, contextually, Martin is like my little brother. So that's kind of the relationship thing that we have going on, where I'm the mature and experienced one, and Martin is just annoying.
Oh, really? Is that the relationship it is? And he comes to you with problems he has?
Pretty much.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. So just to contextualize our interactions for everybody.
There we go. Fantastic. Right. So thank you for joining us, everybody who's live. And like I say, if you do want to join us live and you listen to the podcast, and just head along to the Sports Therapy Association YouTube channel or Facebook at 8 o'clock, normally on Tuesday. Right. Alistair, good to see you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm very well. I'm not so much enjoying the darker nights all of a sudden, but it's, it is what it is.
This is true. I could get to a whole conversation about that. I've tried going to the gym and do running on a treadmill in the evenings, but it's just too hot and too many people. So I'm going to have to go and take up running outside in the dark again, which I'm not a big fan of. But
get the reflective gear and the head torch back out.
Exactly. Have you seen that? Yeah, it's fun. It looks great, but it's just, you can't really switch off and relax. But anyway, we digress. What is weird is a whole year, or practically a few days short, has passed since we did this, which seems ridiculous.
I know.
Where have those 300 days gone? You were a guest with us back in November last year. It was the day after Halloween, if I remember rightly, for episode 172, which was entitled "Keeping Your Hair On: What You Weren't Taught About Communication," which was the presentation you gave at Therapy Expo last year in the STA Theatre as well. You're back again at Therapy Expo this year. For people with their pens and papers ready, it's going to be 2:25 p.m. on day one, November the 27th. So there you go. Have your lunch and then go to the STA Theatre. Bring your lunch with you if you want to get there early, and listen to the presentation by Alistair, which is going to be "The Patient No One Told You How to Treat," which we're going to delve into and I'm really keen to hear about. But I guess the most important thing is hopefully there's some people listening who don't know about you. So I wondered whether, I know it's so difficult, especially for a man of your age, as you've mentioned, compared to Martin, but easy for Martin, but a man who's got experience and wit and that sort of thing and wisdom. Yeah, give us a summary of how you and why you became the LD physio.
So yeah, thanks for reminding me what time I'm on. I've just written those things down actually as well.
There you go.
So yeah. So I'm a specialist, a specialist physiotherapist. I operate in the private sector. Ex-NHS physiotherapist. I've also worked for charities and volunteered at 3 World Games for Special Olympics, Great Britain. Essentially, I ended up falling into learning disabilities primarily because at the time when I graduated in 2010, there were no jobs. There were around 100 applicants for every physio post. And a third of my cohort actually didn't even go into the profession. They left the profession entirely. So I happened to find the only job that was available. I think I was the only person in our cohort of 120 to get a job before we graduated. It was crazy times back then. And I ended up just getting the only job that was available, which happened to be community learning disabilities. Now, what I see with hindsight is that I had an older brother who had learning disabilities. And so almost my entire upbringing, those previous 22, 23 years, had been leading up to that point of me getting a job as a specialist learning disability physio. And then I worked in the NHS for probably about 3 years across my career now. I went private to give myself more freedom, to give myself more flexibility, and to give myself more voice that I'm able to say the things that need to be said. I think not everything is rosy when it comes to healthcare for people with learning and intellectual disabilities. In fact, things are quite dire. And we all, as healthcare professionals, need to take a role in being better at supporting these kind of patients. And that's why I am here speaking to you at the Sports Therapy Association, because sports therapists, soft tissue therapists, massage therapists all have a role to play in, at the very least, being aware of these issues and able to advocate for people with these needs. Because, as you mentioned, there are 1.5 million of them in the UK. And apparently there's a study done that looked at people who have a personal connection to somebody with a learning disability, and find that there are 13 million people in the UK who have a personal connection to somebody with a learning disability. So there's a lot of power there, and we just need to know how to harness it in order to affect change. And this is my little way to go one step at a time, one clinician at a time, to try and make some change.
That's such a valuable point, because we talk about that people who are living with a disability of some form, but yeah, obviously it's the families and the people who are living with them whose lives are affected as well, particularly if there's, like you say, there's treatment which lacks in many departments. It was actually 2022 when I met you at Therapy Expo for the first time, with a presentation entitled Diagnostic Overshadowing, When the Correct Diagnosis Can Kill. Maybe can you define diagnostic overshadowing? Because it's something which I hadn't come across the word in. I come across the phenomenon, but not those words. And I think it's quite an important word to know about, because it makes you start thinking and realizing what the situation is.
Yeah, I think so. And probably diagnostic overshadowing is one of the most important parts that I teach about, but not many people have come across it. Diagnostic overshadowing is when you put down a clinical presentation of somebody to the fact that they have a particular characteristic. Now, in the case of my personal and professional interest, that is a learning disability. So somebody turns up in your clinic and they are displaying, I don't know, hand biting or new behaviors or certain things, or certain clinical criteria that you would normally attribute to something and investigate. But because they have a learning disability, that overrides your thought processes, and you sort of go, well, of course they're going to do that. They've got a learning disability. That's what these kind of people do. And therefore you don't investigate the pathology in the same way that you would do. Now, this isn't just a phenomenon that's linked to learning disabilities. It's something that I believe exists hugely in the care of elderly people. I think it's hugely prevalent in mental health services. And I think probably the biggest sector of our population is women. And we look at women's health and the health of females in the population. And all the times women are almost gaslit into, you know, it's all in your head, your pain. There was another study done the other day that came out, and I can't remember the name of it. And they were looking at studying women in pain and how over the years women have been told, well, you know, it's a menstrual cycle thing, or it's menopausal, or just you just cast these things off to these diagnostic criteria that overarch and cloud everything else that you would see. But if you took that aspect away and just looked at the clinical presentation, you would treat things differently. And diagnostic overshadowing is when you don't do that and you miss serious pathology, or you miss pathology that's treatable. And that leads, for in our case, for people with learning and intellectual disabilities, to nearly half, it's about 44% in the latest figures, but last year was half of deaths of people with learning disabilities were found to be from preventable healthcare conditions.
That's so shocking. Such a shocking statistic. And this is, again, I mean, there's going to be plenty of times when I say this during the program, but people you really should follow. If that's blown your mind, which hopefully it has, if you understood it, then follow Alistair on social media, and there'll be in the notes obviously links to it, but I would recommend that you follow either on Instagram or even on TikTok, if whatever you tend to look at most, without going into why you're on TikTok. But if that's your feed and that comes up, then follow Alistair Beverley on that. It's always _the LD physio _. That's where you can find him. Because I mean, it's an emotive topic anyway, but you drop some serious truth bombs that should make people feel a bit guilty for not knowing. But then that's not the answer, is it? There's reasons why. Where do you place the guilt? Why isn't this more common information? Why does everyone know what a Kardashian twin is doing, and yet they don't know the sort of things which you're putting out there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky thing, and it's something I've tried to delve into, and I think we have a societal issue in how we look at, and sorry, I've just seen that comment. Yeah, I've been trolled successfully there. Well done, Martin. I misread it actually, so never mind. I think we've got a societal issue with where we place value in society, and unfortunately, there's been a big thing in the past sort of, 10, 15 years of looking at you are valuable if you can contribute to society. If you are somebody who is financially contributing to the economy, and therefore people with disabilities are seen as freeloaders, scroungers. There's been that narrative, from without going too much into politics, of trying to reduce social care costs, and people are freeloading on the economy, and they're scrounging off you and I and getting benefits, and all this malarkey that's led to actually people being not valued because they don't contribute in those ways. And the challenge there is that because we don't see them as valuable, we don't even take the time to educate people about these things. It's seen as niche, and being seen as niche creates a self-fulfilling prophecy where 3% of the population right now are being almost ignored within healthcare training. Mm-hmm. So when we look at it, my posts aren't to make any individual feel bad. They are to highlight the scale of tasks. Now, the things that I'm saying aren't new. They're publicly available information. And if somebody wants to put on a conference feedback, this is all stuff I could just Google. And I was like, yes, you could, but you don't.
Yeah.
And that's why I need to say it. I'm happy to be the mouthpiece. I'm happy to be the person who takes the stick. I'm happy to be the person who maybe riles people up, because that's what's needed. We need to be emotive with the things that we're saying, because the old way of going, people with learning disabilities are great and people are differently abled, isn't working. We need to tell you that half of people are dying. They could still be alive. I need to tell you the story about how my brother died. I need to tell you the story about how this blind girl went in for cataract surgery and then starved to death, an inpatient in the hospital. I need to tell you about that as a routine elective cataract surgery. These things need to come out, because if they don't, the old ways of saying how things need to change aren't working. So we need something new. And I might be getting it wrong. I might not be that catalyst for change, but I'm going to try.
No, I think you do a great job, but this is why I implore people need to start following you, so they start making this a common day conversation, because it will. Some of the things which Alistair shares, you will comment on it with somebody else, because you feel the need to share it with somebody else, because you'll be so blown away with some of the stats and things. You'll feel obliged to share it, and that's how quality information gets out there. So yes. I'll say at this point, it's well worth having a look at Alistair's website. I'm going to put a little screenshot up here for people who like the visuals, because a lot of people, you join us live because you like those visuals, don't you? So go to theldphysio.com. You'll see a whole host of information there. But in particular, as I've pointed out in the last couple of episodes where Alistair's joined us, you will see a blog which is all about Alistair growing up with his older brother, John, and the it's an incredible mixture of humor and honesty and tragedy and anger, but it's something which you should all, I mean, I rarely say that everybody should do anything, but I really do believe that everybody should read this and just take it away with them, whoever you are, whatever you may be suffering or not suffering from. It's just eye-opening. And written so wonderfully. So go along to the ldphysio.com and have a look at that if you haven't already, because I don't want to sound like over the top, but it will change your life. Some things you read, you just go, wow, that's made me into a different person, and you'll go to sleep and your brain will process it and you'll wake up a better person for it. So go and have a look at that if you can, please. Right.
I'm not entirely sure why, Matt, but the most liked blog post on it, the most read one, is the time that John set me on fire. I'm not entirely sure whether to take that as a positive thing. Or maybe people looking for instructions.
But this is just you write it in such a human way, and like you mentioned, there's saving you from bullies. John suffered from Down syndrome, wasn't it? I mean, that's something else I want to point out as well, is just to clarify, because a lot of people understandably won't understand the difficulty between a learning difficulty, a mental health issue, or a learning disability. And I think it's quite important too. So how would you separate them? How would you define them?
So it's not helped by the international nature of social media. But I shall define it as we do in the UK, which is where I practice primarily. And so much as a learning difficulty is something which makes learning harder, but is not sufficient to warrant the term disability. So its effects aren't as wide-reaching as to affect it to the level that you classed as disabled. So things like dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, all are disabling in of themselves. But having dyslexia doesn't mean that you don't need support. Having dyslexia doesn't mean that you need help with having a wash and brushing your teeth before you go to bed. Having dyscalculia doesn't mean that you're unable to drive a car. And again, that's not to say that all people with learning disabilities are unable to do those things. In fact, and also people with learning disabilities may also have dyslexia, dyscalculia. But if you just have an ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, those will be classed as learning difficulties within the UK definition. A learning disability is something where there is a developmental issue that affects how the brain functions on a physiological level. So people with Down syndrome have an extra copy of either chromosome number 21, or you can have an extra copy of trisomy 17 as well, which is called mosaic Down syndrome, which is a much rarer form, but manifests slightly different. You can also have translocation, but I'm getting a bit specific here. There is something physical that's happened, whether that's cerebral palsy, whether there's some genetically inherited or genetic mutation. I don't like the word mutation, disorder. And again, disorder, difficult language is hard to use when talking about disability. People talk about people suffer from things and people actually live with things rather than suffer from people.
I just said that. I'm glad you brought that up, because as I said it, I just swallowed a little bit of babysit because I said he suffered from Down syndrome. That's exactly the sort of thing. But at least I'm thinking it.
No, that's fair. That's fair.
But
bring that sort of thing into the, and this isn't a woke conversation. This isn't a woke thing to say.
But it's good, isn't it, to question the words you use? I think it's really important because the words we use do. I know one thing, for example, which you can't stand, to the extent that it does make me smile, is where this impression we've got of some people with learning disabilities, because they're quieter and by themselves, we think, and maybe they're smiling, and we stereotype thinking, oh, they're such angels, they're such nice people.
Oh, angels.
And I think you said on the website, it boils my blood. But yeah, that's that. Tell me this, because that's something which I think people will relate to and actually think, yeah, I do think that. I pass somebody with Down syndrome, I look and think, oh, at least they're happy. They're so affectionate, and that annoys you, doesn't it? Because what's the issue with that?
Well, it does, because I think, I don't know if we see these things to make ourselves feel better. Is it about seeing somebody with a disability and then thinking, oh, well, at least they're happy, and therefore that makes up for all the injustice that they're experiencing, and that somehow makes us feel better. Like, people with Down syndrome get pissed off. People with Down syndrome get annoyed. People with Down syndrome are dicks. My older brother was a dick sometimes. And I've not used this hashtag a lot, but I think the hashtag right to be a dick is one that I nearly tried to start off about disabled people. And there are people with learning disabilities who are arseholes. There are people with physical disabilities who are arseholes. I can be an arsehole. Martin Christensen frequently is an arsehole.
We've got it.
Sorry, I've harkened back to the swear words here, but it's a very emotive for me, because people with learning disabilities are just people, and they will have moments of being dicks, and they will have moments of being nice people, and then they'll have moments when they're happy, they'll have moments when they're sad. Nobody exists in a permanent state of being. And that's just the same. And that's what I want to see. What we're trying to get to with all this, with all the blog posts about John, with all the reels, is about normalizing disability and about seeing somebody with a disability and just going, oh, okay, let's engage and have that confidence to talk to the person rather than going, oh, there's a thing, or oh, let's stare, or oh, isn't that a cute thing? It just becomes normal. And when we can normalize things, we start to treat people as normal. And when we look at that equality and equity of service, then we're able to give people the services that they require. We give staff the training. And actually, then when we normalize it, we start to recognize there's benefits to other patients too. And that's another reason I'd suggest to go on my website, or, if we do any future courses, to come on them, is because right now, half of my caseload doesn't even have a learning disability. But half of my caseload have come to me because they value the skills that I have as a specialist working in this area that I can apply to the patients that I work with. And I've had patients who've had horrific experiences with mainstream or various healthcare services. And they come to me because they value this approach that I have. And that approach has come from working with people with learning disabilities. So what I'm trying to look at, and what my talk last year was about trying to take skills that I've learned or that exist within my area of practice and look at how we can translate those into mainstream services. So that's another reason for people to come and listen, because there is stuff that you can get from there that will make you a better clinician with non-learning disabled and disabled patients.
Definitely. Great. Yeah, great advice. And again, we'll move on to the actual talk in a second, but I think the way I see it and the way you make me think is, whilst we are having these stereotypes of people with a learning disability, then we're not realizing that they're people as well. And that's one of the problems that could cause diagnostic overshadowing, because we're not thinking, oh yeah, this person could actually feel lonely or pissed off as well, or they could be suffering from mental health problems. In fact, I think it shows, doesn't it, studies that people who have got learning disabilities are more likely to have mental health problems because of the way they're treated in that. So the last thing they need coming through a therapist door is us to think it's not accept that they're a person and they've got the right to be pissed off or be a dick or whatever and be angry. So yeah. No,
it is the case. And yeah, you mentioned, people with learning disabilities 3 times more likely to have experienced mental health issues. And another thing, not to get too macabre, but a lot of the work that I do is help and support autistic people as well, who also have learning disabilities. And for the first time last year, they studied the 2022 data on. So there's a thing called the LEADER Project, which exists to try and study the deaths of people with learning disabilities, and that's how we know that 44% of deaths last year were preventable. 44% of deaths in 2022, because they do there's a year lag, were from preventable healthcare conditions. That's how we knew through COVID people with Down syndrome were 8 times more likely to die from Down syndrome. They also included for the first time people autistic people with and without learning disabilities. I'm thinking of mental health issues. The number 1 killer of autistic people in the UK was suicide. Now, that says a lot about the state of support and mental health services for autistic people, when that is the number 1 killer. It's pretty horrific. Yeah. Pretty horrific.
Would autism be? I've seen autism described as an example of a learning disability rather than, because it does affect, but then there's different levels of autism.
The understanding of autism is an evolving area of practice, and the best people to hear from are autistic people themselves. There's some great people. Joanna Grace, she runs a company called the Sensory Project that looks at supporting people with profound and multiple disabilities, but she herself is autistic, and she speaks really, really well and has written a book about being autistic. There's another author, and it was a former academic, called Pete Warmby, who's fantastic. He's on Instagram as well. You can find him, and he gives a great perspective of what it is like to live as an autistic person. So my work and my view on autism is essentially synthesized from what they've said, but also with the patient people that I work with, plus academic reading. So it's interesting, and autism is not in of itself a learning disability. Autism exists on a spectrum, and it's quite funny because you often hear the phrase, "Well, we're all on the spectrum, aren't we?" And with the increase in exposure of the phrase neurodivergence and social media making everybody think that they are neurodivergent or ADHD or something, there's so many posts like, oh, do you ever blink? Oh, that's such an autistic thing to do. They're just rubbish posts that are just clickbait. What I would say, and I think the reason that people fall foul of this notion of we're all on the spectrum is because a lot of the things that autistic people experience are things that are relatable to most of us. So, autism is a different way of perceiving the world, and social interactions is the best way to describe it. But it's characterized quite commonly, but not exclusively, in a desire for justice, social, just general justice, whether that's the rules or law or just, unwritten rules. Sometimes a difficulty in experiencing social situations, or a difference in experiencing social situations is probably the best phrase. An ability to hyper-focus on particular tasks. And that's, some people describe that as their autistic superpower, is that I can just hyper-focus and shut everything else off. Autistic people also experience higher rates of the difficulty with processing sensory information from the world around them. However, the majority of autistic people go through their lives and you probably wouldn't know that they're autistic, primarily because a lot of them mask due to social anxiety and risk of being ostracized from peer groups. But a lot of people have relationships, houses, families, jobs, and don't have any sort of, learning impairment whatsoever. They just have that difference in social communication and understanding those rules. I was going on to the point of why I think people think we're all on the spectrum, and those differences that autistic people experience, we can all relate to. I can relate to a want for justice in the world and on social media. I can sometimes find social situations difficult or tiring. The difference is that it's about the response that we have to these situations. If I see injustice, I find it hard, and it does, sometimes upsets me. But if I have something else that I need to do, I can move on from that. And I can almost park those emotions for the period of time that I need to move on from and get on with my day. A lot of autistic people may see those things, and again, not exclusively, but a lot of people will really find those things almost incredibly deflating, incredibly tiring, super fatiguing. Some people will struggle to leave the house. I can go to the doctors and the dentist, and I might not like to go to the dentist, but I can do it as part of my day, and I might whinge about it. But I don't need then to go to bed for the next 2 days because it's taken so much out of me to engage with that. So I think that's the notion of we're all on the spectrum, and actually there is a distinction between an autistic person and a non-autistic person. So there's a long-winded answer covering lots of different things there around autism in its microcosm. And I may have done some, if there's any autistic or neurodivergent people listening, they may be screaming at their monitors or headphones right now. I appreciate I'm not an autistic person. So as I said before, the best people to listen to are the people I mentioned before.
Amazing. No, great stuff. And I'll make sure the links to those people you've mentioned go in the show notes so that people can look them up. So thank you for that. So there's all of this is a reason in itself to come and see you talk about whatever you like at Therapy Expo. But this year you've chosen a title, and I love the titles you choose. I don't know how long you think about them, or whether they just come to you. But this year, just to repeat, people have joined us a little bit late, not kind of picking on anyone, Imi Tester, for being late. Still better here than not here. Good to see you, Imi. Thanks for joining us. We're talking about Therapy Expo this year. Alistair Beverley is going to be with us at 2:25 p.m. on day one, which is November the 27th, a Wednesday, in the STA Theatre, with a presentation called "The Patient No One Told You How to Treat." We've kind of talked about the message behind that title, and it holds a very stark truth and very sad truth. But what are you hoping that people gain from coming to it, essentially? Because it's 25 minutes, which is always a challenge, I appreciate. Very difficult to write something to last 25 minutes and get your message out there. But what are you hoping people walk away with?
That's not a slander on the fact that I ran short last year with my talk, was it?
No, you didn't. No, I just gave more time for questions.
If you want a quick talk, Alistair will be done in 5. So the talk is essentially because it's a reflection of the fact that we as healthcare practitioners and massage therapists and people that exist in the health and wellness industry, we don't get exposure to people with learning disabilities. I know because universities are recruiting me to deliver content on learning disabilities. And I'm like, if that's the bottom of the barrel, then there's clearly no bugger else talking about it, because if you're coming to me, then stuff's got bad. So we don't get exposure. And actually, there's been studies done on healthcare professionals and how much training or support they get around supporting people with learning and intellectual disabilities, and it is minuscule. It may be an hour at best in a whole 3 to 5 year curriculum. And so what I'd like is people to come away, number one, with the confidence that if you see somebody in the clinic or in life or in a healthcare situation, that you are better able to be confident and do the things that need to be done in order to make that person have a positive experience. What I'd like you to also take is, as we mentioned before, is some skills from that, or some tips and tidbits from that you can then use to apply, that will be the benefit of all patients that you support. And so essentially, we want to improve confidence, we want to improve understanding, and we also want to start a conversation, because that's why I'm here talking today, is because we need to talk about these things, because if we don't talk about them, some people and some of our training doesn't even acknowledge that they exist, and it creates that self-fulfilling prophecy that this is a niche area, when actually people with disabilities should have the same, or do have the same rights to access mainstream services as anybody else does. And people with disabilities, learning disabilities, partake in sport. They get sports injuries, and they require rehab from those, and they will be coming to STA members for that rehabilitation, or physiotherapists, and therefore we need you guys to be prepared to be able to support them, and genuinely that starts right from the scratch of how do I introduce myself to a person with a learning disability. Because I've had situations, I take students on clinical placement as part of my training. As I mentioned before, I also teach badly. And I've had students where there's a situation, we'll talk about a session, we'll talk about a patient that's upcoming, we will make all the plans of the subjective, of the objective, we'll get in front of the patient, and the student will, I'll be sat beside him, the student will go, what do I say now? And I'm like, say hello, introduce yourself, try and create some sort of connection. But because we've never come across people with disabilities, we just don't know how to interact. We don't know if there's a special way. There's so much, tiptoeing around. Should I say this? Shouldn't I say this? And I'm like, well, it'd be more better if you said something than if you just sit there and do nothing. Mm-hmm. So confidence, I think, will be the key thing.
It's a great word, and it's so cool to hear, because especially with our audience who are a lot of hands-on therapists, and I think alongside hands-on, there is a desire to help. There's a certain altruism, maybe an empathy, because you're willing to, I always kind of say it, you're willing sometimes to rub a very hairy back with oil between your fingers. And that's not something that everyone wants to do, especially not getting paid that much. But there is, I think, with a lot of manual therapists, a natural kind of empathy. I mean, it doesn't mean you can't learn better techniques and learn motivational interviewing and stuff, but that doesn't mean you're still human, and you're kind of limited to a certain extent by your life experiences. So yeah, if someone comes in who you've not exposed to before, then yeah, you are just going to go white as a sheet, or start stumbling or thinking, what do I do now? Treat them as a person. Yeah. Just because they can't communicate with in the same way doesn't mean they're not going to hear you in the same way. Or so yeah, amazing. And you're definitely the person to do it. I'm just going to remind people who are listening live, if you have had any experience working with somebody with a learning disability, obviously it's going to be different. They're all individuals. There's no kind of one classic tale, but it'd be interesting to hear if any of you had any experiences. What was it like the first time? Were you prepared? Is there anything that helped you, or you wished you'd done afterwards, just to keep the conversation going in there? Obviously we've got some comments here. Martin, I can't bring up all your heckling, but we'll have a little pause here to bring something up. Martin Christensen says, everything Ali does ends up lasting shorter than he wants. Some will say it's still worth it. Again, we'll have the story about Alistair carrying somebody up nude up the stairs to put that. Yeah, we'll talk about that later on at the end of the show. Thanks, Martin, for reminding us about that incident.
Speaking of short, yes, Martin, thank you.
Speaking of short pants, yeah.
I think back to the point around the session, and I think in terms of how to communicate with people, that's something that I focus quite heavily on. I've got 2 physio students right now, third-year physio students from the University of Nottingham. And it's really interesting reading their reflections, because there's a lot of stuff that we do every day that we don't necessarily consider. And there was a great reflection that it talked about how the student had learned to reduce the power imbalance that exists between therapist and patient, and how making themselves more human and being receptive to the person's communication style and adapting themselves had improved the engagement of that person. So much so that this person who hadn't been out of their house for a therapy session in 6 months is now planning to come to clinic for next week's therapy session. So, we will talk about some of these skills, and actually having students right now is really informing the talk that I'm writing, because it's making me consciously aware of things that we just do because we just do them, and to make them more salient points for you guys when we come to Therapy Expo.
Fantastic. Yeah, I've been following the journey of these two people. What was their history? Where did they come from, and how did they end up with you?
But it certainly wasn't a bakery, I can tell you that.
You have to watch the reels to understand these jokes on bread and tug of war and stuff like that. But yeah,
no. The theory there is that there's a positive correlation between students who produce home baked goods, and students who get high marks. Now, it can't be for legal reasons proven causative, but there's just a strong positive correlation. And we're out there to help students try and get the best marks they can. So we just suggest that people bring baked goods. Today are university students, University of Nottingham, third year. One, Anna, is the England under-20s lacrosse captain. European champions, Clang, we'll drop that in there. And then there's Joe, who is his third year, and he is an avid Brazilian jiu-jitsu fighter, and a recent volleyball enthusiast as of last weekend.
But considerably weaker than Anna, though, it seems.
It's
strange, isn't it? Jiu-jitsu is fine when you're on the floor weighing your gi, but standing up seems to be a little bit of a letdown.
Well, it's quite funny. I use a boxing or hook jab pad work a lot with the people I work with, because everyone has a seemingly desire to punch me in the face. So pads are usually quite a good defense mechanism, and they got the pads on the first time. And Anna actually, in her first year at uni, did a charity boxing match. So she did like the training sessions for it, and she started striking the pads, and we were all just a bit like, "Oh,
what have we got here?"
we just all took a step back. So they're two students who hadn't got any experience with learning disability. I'd actually been in to their uni to do lectures last year. I was in for 2 days. Teaching, and actually when I taught, I took 3 people I work with, or the university paid 3 people I work with to come in and give their own story as part of the day. We did half a day with those guys telling their experience with healthcare services, and with the idea then that the students also get exposure in interacting with a person with a learning disability, because we said it's not something that people do, and that was kind of the only experience that they got of disability and learning disabilities. They are currently halfway through week 3 of a 5-week placement. And clinically, they're doing all right. Baked goods wise, it's 50-50,
We're learning.
See how things go.
And so the idea is hopefully that, it's great that the University of Nottingham is sending people to you, because I guess that means they've got an interest. They want these students to come back and then feed it to the rest of the year. And then maybe they'll change the syllabus, which is always a very slow process, isn't it? But this is a very important step to doing that. Like I say, people, if you do want to follow some of these stories, and they're very much well worth following, then Instagram Reels or TikTok. Let's bring up, I should also mention, I've got like hairs standing up on the back of my back, just normally when Anna Maria is cursing me, even though she's not in here. So I should mention as well that you're going to be in the Hands-on Hub as well on the second day. So if people are only coming along to the Thursday as opposed to the Wednesday, then you can still catch Alistair in the Hands-on Hub by the ST School, who will be there at 12:10 p.m. with a presentation, Silent Struggles, the Impact of Sensory Processing on Clinical Practice. Now, obviously, there's going to be a crossover of what we talked about, but what's that presentation? What are some of the aims of that and what people will walk away with?
I think for people looking first at this, I should say that I'm not bald. I've been victim to some quite vicious cropping on here. I do have a full head of hair.
I think Martin was in charge of
Therapy
Expo.
Twice my picture has been shown on this podcast, and twice it's been absolutely horrific. So thank you for that. sensory processing is our brain's ability to interpret sensory data from the world around us. And there are many ways in which that can influence somebody's experience of everyday living. But we all have situations when we are better or worse at dealing with sensory data. If you are, for example, the classic thing of being in a car or on public transport and you're trying to find a new address, sometimes it's dark, you might be tired, and the classic thing is you turn the radio off to see better and find the address. That is us unconsciously filtering out superfluous sensory information. Or if you have that situation where the music's just too loud all of a sudden, if it's music that you're not in control of, all of a sudden that music's too loud, and it's really and that aggravates us to quite a level where that becomes all you can hear about. It's like somebody says, don't think about your own breathing. And now everyone's thinking about their own breathing. Mm-hmm. Breathe in, breathe out, please continue that. So we have the ability, the majority of us who don't struggle with sensory processing issues, to filter out superfluous information. But there are people for whom, for various reasons, their brain struggles to filter out what is important and what is superfluous. Like for right now, people listening maybe in a car, maybe at home, their dog might be asleep, somebody might be snoring, I can hear my computer whirring like it's going to take off. But I can filter all that information out because my brain knows that that's low level information that doesn't need to be presented to me right now. And it says I need to focus on Matt's voice. And so I can do that. But for people with sensory processing difficulties, their brain cannot do that. So our talk will explore about what happens or what can happen when the brain struggles with those issues and how it can impact what we can do in clinical practice, but more importantly, what we can do to help people who may struggle with those things.
Fantastic. So again, it'll be very empowering and giving people confidence in the tools to make a difference. So great. So something a little bit of Alistair on both days, on the Wednesday and the Thursday. Right. It's 8:42, which means it must be Violet time. For people who are following you on Reels or on TikTok, let's just bring these up to give people a little visual as well. So yeah, on Instagram posts, but also the Reels, it's just the way you film it. It's just amazing. It's so effective. I'm not joking. It's true. And also on Instagram, on TikTok as well, which is a wonderful platform for you. And people will be pleased to know, not a dancing site, but it's just such great. It's just, if you had to describe how should TikTok be used to put quality information, education out there, then you are it. So what we're going to talk about now is a star. In fact, the star is on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 6th post in there, called Violet, who you came across. Now, before we bring up a video of Violet, can you, in your own words, give us a little backstory to how you and Violet got to know each other?
I was hoodwinked.
Oh, really? Was it? Still claim that, do you?
Yeah. Still claim that. I happened to be working late one day. It was a Tuesday, actually, in end of May, and I came home late. My wife and daughter were at home, and I came through the door, and my wife was like, "Good evening, darling. Dinner's on the table now," and it was the way, normally she would have just said, "I've cooked dinner, it's on there if you want it." And my daughter was like, "Hello, father."
Oh, God.
And I was like, "What's going on?" And then my wife, Liz, I just call my name Liz, had shown me a video of this puppy that had been found locally and was being looked after by some volunteers who support a veterinary centre where she'd been taken into. Of a puppy, a disabled puppy, whose front paws didn't work in the way that they should, asking if they can rehome it. Now, there was lots of excitement, and it's not uncommon for me to get a video of a dog thrust upon me that needs rehoming upon any point of the day, thanks to social media. Usually, thankfully, they're in like Adelaide or Las Vegas or something, and it's like, okay, obviously. And this one turned out to be at the vet's. It was a mile and a half from our house. They got like 1,000 likes on Instagram, so I was like quite confident in going, okay, do you know what? If you want to, put an inquiry in, and she said, great, I already have. And I was like, oh, and all of a sudden we got this started to get serious. And she said, oh, well, do you know what? We could really support it. But we've got 2 Labradors right now. So we were 2-dog household. They're Labradors, so they're not the smallest dogs in the world. And then she said, then the message came back saying, yeah, no, nobody's inquired. Nobody's inquired about taking her in. Can you help? So then I was like, oh, wait, this is quite quickly becoming real. And then I started to think, okay, there was discussion, can we help the dog? And I was like, I don't know what breed she is. We don't know anything about her breeding or upbringing, or vet bills, all these sorts of things was a real sort of running through my head. We don't know what, her parents were like, what was the temperament? Usually it's nice to meet the parents of the dog so that you can understand a bit more about the dog and where it's come from. And this dog's just been dumped in a box under a hedge beside a flower bed for 2 nights. And when they found it, it had not a lot of fur and no bark left, or yap. I think it'd been dumped quite young. And so I said, look, okay, in the end, what we'll do is we can take it in. I'm a human physio, but I think, doing a bit of reading around, we can maybe help it and see if we can, keep it for a while, see if we can offer it some rehab support, work alongside the vets, and see how we go. So then they were like, let's go and see it. And I said, no, we're not going to take you, because if I take you 2 to the vets, we'll adopt that dog and every other animal that's at the vets. So I said, let me go down, because I need to genuinely see whether or not we think we can help this dog from a rehab perspective. So a quick hasty Google on dog anatomy helped me to identify, like,
got no soleus, we all know that.
Yeah, well, we're talking about the wrists. It looks like it's her elbows. The problem is actually it's the dog wrists with the problem. I was like, okay. I went down to the vets, and then in the car park of the vets did a little video, just sort of freaking out, just going for social media, like, oh God, what am I doing? Telling the story. And then of course I met her, and she poddles up in what somebody described on social media as the cutest commando crawl ever. And I can't unsee that now. And that was it. Yeah, she was clearly coming home.
Right.
So
should we stick the video up? I think that's a good introduction. I think now we've said some words, and now we'll have a look. Now, people who have joined us live, get your tears and your laughter ready as we join a little montage of the journey of Violet. Yeah, let's do that now. I'll put it in here. I'm hoping everyone can hear sound. If you can't hear sound, then let me know in the comments. Let's move it back to the beginning there. Not a dry eye in the house. It's such magnificent. If you listen to the podcast and all you got was quite a powerful kind of like anthem song, but you need to really pause your podcast and go and see that on YouTube, because you didn't see the messages coming on the screen. So obviously we're seeing, I mean, it'd be wonderful if we could meet Violet in person, but obviously that's too late for that to happen now. But
hang on a minute, because she never lets me go alone. Actually, she is. She's here.
She is in person.
She is. Big ears and all.
And you actually know, again, this is just like a fan from your reels. I'm the biggest fan. You know what breed she is now as well, don't you?
We do. So we now know that Violet is, the majority of her is Staffy. But she also has a mixture of French Bulldog and Greyhound. Hello.
Sorry to wake you up,
The
Violet.
internet is
You
here.
know, the power. You're an influencer.
The
you
internet
got to
is here.
you got to do your looks. So this was the dog that had been dumped for at least a couple of days. Couldn't even bark.
Yep.
And as we saw in the videos, both, particularly her left, was unable to support herself on the foot, on the toes, and it was kind of, as you say, a commando walk. Which there's so many things to take away from this video. I mean, there's so many things. The robustness, in a sense, of an animal who can still continue. I think there's a celebration of the robustness of the human body. She might have been in massive pain, but the fact she was still managing to walk like that. But then, yeah, you managed to rehab her. And the messages that are on the screen there, I think one of the most important messages, because we could talk about Violet for ages, was for people who couldn't quite see the words, your message was, you don't have to be an angel to make a difference.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit more about that message. I mean, what you hoped people to pick up the message from that video.
I think I'm a believer, and this is kind of, what my whole work is around LD physio, is that, we all, the world is built on connections, and each one of us has the power to do one small good thing. And quite often we are all looking for some savior of the world, some savior of a certain situation. We're waiting for that thing. And actually, you can be that thing for yourselves, or you can be that thing for somebody else. We need to almost, to an extent, stop waiting. I probably spent the first 5 years of my career, if I'm honest, maybe first 7 years of my career, not wanting or not having the confidence to get on this LD physio train, even though I knew that was the correct train to get on and where I needed to go to be able to try and affect change. And I've seen, and I've had, having feedback from individual clinicians who just said, I had one patient in today, and what I've taken from this reel or this post or this tweet has really, really changed my perspective, and I did this differently. And I think, to that person, you might have made a small change in the whole universe, but to that person, you've changed the world. So that those small things do have a large effect. And whether that's, adopting a little puppy, has made a small change for a lot of people. She's gained thousands of followers on social media. It's transformed our lives, but more to the point is we've saved her life, for want of a better phrase. And that's not to sound like, oh, aren't we great, and blow smoke of our own bottoms. But, we hosted a party for the veterinary staff who helped save her and took her in. And she was a week away from being euthanized when we took her in, 1 week away from it. And actually to see the value that she's, given, and how we saw her and saw the inherent value in her, just enabled us to make a small change to our daily living habits. Because each day now it is sort of a small change. And it's transformed my life for her. And that's what I sort of take into my teachings. People with learning disabilities, if you can make one small change or two small changes, they're going to be small things that are small things to you, but to other people, they mean the absolute world. So never undervalue and underestimate the power of small changes, because even little pebbles thrown into big lakes create ripples.
Very cool. Yeah, love it. And there's, again, we talked a bit off air, there's so much in that journey which people reflect with. And I like the fact that obviously, I've heard you talk before about, we think our communication skills are great, but put someone in front of us who doesn't communicate the way we're used to, and we realize I don't know what to do now. So when you've got like an animal, which is just got, again, is someone who's got different communications, especially if they're scared and these emotions. Then I guess with Violet, it was a whole journey as well to get her trust, her confidence, to give her confidence to do things and try things out and walk differently. So was there parallels there? Or am I just being kind of romantic and trying to?
No, I think there are. I think there are. In terms of adapting, and you could see that Violet is just a dog, but Violet is a person who has her own thoughts, wants, needs. I have 2 Labradors that I swear are part otter in their breeding, because they'd rather be subaquatic mammals, maybe like water hippos, I'm not sure, than dogs. And Violet absolutely detests all things related to hydrology. Moisture, apart from drinking it. She hates rain, hates wet ground, hates being in water, And so she has her own little quirks. My other two dogs like to come for a snuggle every now and again. But one of them doesn't really stay on the sofa very long. She's more happy on the floor. But as you can see behind me, this is Violet's favorite space. She head behind you or head in something, and she is just happy. So she's an individual. And in the same way, people, not just people with disabilities, but all people are individuals, and therefore people have their own preferences. And when it comes to, people with learning disabilities specifically, you mentioned, we all think we're good at communication, but then put you in a clinical setting with a person who is unable to understand what a question is, then how are you going to undertake a subjective? How are you going to do that? And that's kind of, those are the challenges that we face every day. And there isn't this is how you do it answer. There's a this is how you approach it. But knowing and thinking on your feet and adapting yourself to each person is part of the skill set that we look to develop as specialist learning disability clinicians. And hopefully it's part of a skill set that will enhance everybody's clinical practice with every patient they work with. If they can be more receptive to communication methods that the person uses, and whether that is hot back a few weeks, dropping the occasional swear word, it might be that. It might not be that. It might be that for some people I work with, I have to use symbols and pictures to communicate. It might be for some people I work with a brain injury, their perception of spoken language is worse than their ability to read information. So for some people, I'll back up what I'm saying with written down things. It might be that I support people who we use sign language to back up what we're saying at the same time. So we'll communicate in ways using things like Makaton. But everybody has that individualistic approach, and it's our job as clinicians to find that. And when you can find that, everybody has a hook. Everybody has something that helps them to engage, and our job is to find it.
Excellent. Yeah. So there's definitely a crossover, and people could learn so much from being put into that challenge of working outside of their norm of experience, because not everyone is going to be the same who comes to see you. So the more you can learn how to deal with the unexpected, the better. And it could well be the clue to getting them successfully rehabbed. Of rehabbing the whole person and their ecosystem and taking into consideration everything around them, rather than the old-fashioned way of just thinking, I'm going to make this knee move better in a certain way because that's symmetrical now and everything's going to be fine, and you're forgetting about the person on the end of the knee. So amazing. Right, 3 minutes. Very excited to see you again in about 4 weeks now, so that's going to be exciting. Apart from Therapy Expo, which obviously is coming up, have you got anything else exciting coming up or people should know about?
I mean, nothing that rivals the grandeur that is Therapy Expo.
Obviously.
There is some Norwegian boy that after Therapy Expo, I've decided to shelter from other British people for a short period of time coming over. Hoping he keeps his clothes on this time.
Yes, he has paid homage to you. Actually, he has said, seems like a big buffoon of an ogre can also do good. So I think you've touched him. I think he shed a little tear as he sits there in his pants and drinks his beer. Oh, that was always that rhymed then. Gosh, I'm a poet and I know it. I'm going to write that down when I forget this. Right, excellent. It's been great to have you. And because Martin, obviously, Martin was a guest on the podcast 2 or 3 weeks ago. And again, that was all about very much flexibility and us being able to not stick to a stereotype way of healthcare. And why is it that healthcare believes we should all work with a certain way and professionally? And it was a really interesting chat and made a lot of people think and contact us. And we appreciate always contact us if you've got any questions or feedback. And I think this feeds into it nicely as well. You have to be a little bit of a chameleon in healthcare because you're working with different people in front of you and you've got to know how to read and react differently. And that's the way to help people's health, not just it's not a car. It's the classic thing, isn't it? You're not repairing a Ford Cortina. There's no kind of manual. It's much trickier than that. And that's what I hope is what makes it fun. That's part of sometimes it'll be amazing rewards. Sometimes it'll be really difficult because it doesn't go to plan, but we work with people. And sometimes people surprise us, like Martin, for example, is not sitting there in his pants because he has just shared the fact that he says no pants. So great. Thanks.
And this is the gentleman that I'm welcoming into my home in November.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Fortunately, we'd like to remind people that Martin is not a representation of every Norwegian out there. There's very much a spectrum. Talking of spectrums in Norway, and Martin is at one end of it. There's plenty of But we accept him nevertheless, because it's
yes, we value him.
We value and accept him, and everyone's got their quirks.
Equal opportunities, blah, 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 blah.
Right, people. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're listening to the podcast and you'd like to follow Alistair Beverley, like I said, probably I find the best places are Instagram or TikTok. It's all the same username. So it's @_the LD physio _ you'll find there. Also the website, and the website I think has got an email on it as well, isn't it, at the top, I think?
Yes, there's a contact me page. Yeah, there's a contact me page
Yeah.
at the bottom of it, but there's an email address on there as well. Yeah, the ldphysio@gmail.com.
And what sort of emails do you encourage people to send you?
Ones that involve money.
Yeah, I want to give you some money. Thank you.
There's a lot of people who purport to give me money, but don't actually. That's quite disappointing. But yeah, no, if anybody's got any questions, I have a lot of people who get in touch just asking about information or resources or directing them, to ways to find more information about these things. I'm more than happy to try and support people with those.
And you've talked about courses and things. Maybe that's something for the future, or
yeah. So I've run online courses as well, and I have done some in-person courses. Unfortunately, my clinical work has skyrocketed of late for the better, but has left me less time to put on courses. But it is still something that forms part of my repertoire. So maybe in the new year I'll get my butt in to get some of those organised.
That'd be amazing. Right. Well, thank you so much for giving us up your time, Alistair. I'm happy to say that it looks like we have been recording and no one's disappeared at all, which is amazing. Thank you as well, people who joined us live. Thank you for your comments and your questions. Cecily, sorry, I didn't read yours out. Let's have Cecily. You were in a sandwich of Martin nonsense, so I'll read yours out now. When I was managing a charity shop, the majority of my volunteers had learning difficulties and disabilities. Respect, understanding, and encouragement was to me all that was needed to work together. Exactly. We throw these words around like everyone can do it. And we're not judging people who lack in those departments, but you're not necessarily born with it. You might have come from circumstances where that was just not involved in your upbringing. So that's where CPD needs to be, doesn't it? A lot of it is learning how to get these things, which we think is just a human quality. And often it's not through a fault, because of us. So yeah, if you got it, you got it. But yeah, respect, understanding, encouragement. It's just the end of war, isn't it? Solve the Middle East. If all those three words were actually easy, it'd be no problem at all. Anyway, that's getting a bit deep and political. So thank you, people. If you listen to the podcast, as always, sorry to sound like a broken record, but do please leave a review, and 5 stars would be nice. 4 if you're not quite sure, but 5 would be even better, because it just helps the good word of our guests get out there. No one gets paid for this. It's just trying to be a conduit for quality information, and every single topic we cover is obviously quality, but this in particular is something which we need to get out there for people to talk about. So do please leave a review, and it will appear high up in Google when people search. Next week, if you want to know who's on next week, we will be here, but to find out, you'll have to follow UK_STA, and we will give details of that shortly. But as always, it'll be recorded live if you want to join us at 8 o'clock on Tuesday. In this case, it'll be 29th of November. So if you can join us then join us, ask questions to the guests, and share some experiences. Until then, once again, thank you very much, Alistair Beverley of theldphysio.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
And thanks, everyone. Take care of each other, and hopefully see some of you next week. Bye-bye.